Welcome back, Scott. Let's dig deeper
Hello.
uh, the topics we've been covering lately, and I wanted to talk about more tools used to measure progress, specifically measuring tools for body composition, because there are many tools out there. When I was in universities, they tried and tested different things on me as well, and I think it's extremely important to highlight that there is a margin of error for every single one of them. And the ones that are usually, well, I'm probably going to say something horribly wrong, but the ones that are usually easier to have access to are the ones that have the biggest margin of error. And let me retract that on a basis. The ones that are easily accessed to and does not require much skill to be used, which is usually the electric ones and so on and so forth. So even the skinfold calipers, unless you have the like a medical grade, probably that's how you call it, like the one I had to buy because I had to get qualified as a caliper technician. That's how they called us. But the one I bought was around 500 pounds.
Mhm.
Pencil, steel, equipment that you have to get calibrated ever so often anyway.
Mhm.
Let's dig into overview of the tools. So what tools can we use for body composition and what are the most commonly used that we see and go through there. I know your favorite is calipers. Maybe start from that and then go deeper about, hey, you can go to lab, you can use DEXA scan, you can do many other things.
Yeah, the calipers are definitely my preferred method. Um, I have a pair of the ones you're referring to, the metal ones with the dial. It's almost like a vernier. They're very good. They're very expensive, but you can also get plastic spring-loaded ones that I compare the two. I don't anymore, but I have compared the two many times, and they're comparable. So as long as the spring fatigue is, monitored, the plastic ones are working for me just as well. But there are many calipers that are no good. I've had many types. There's some where you squeeze them and they beep. They're electronic. They beep once a certain pressure is reached. But the problem is you can bias the reading just by how quickly you squeeze the caliper. If you go very slowly and crimp down, you'll get a beep. If you just rapidly clamp it down, you'll get a beep at a different measurement. And it's just because they're just not that accurate. They're not able to be that accurate with how they're measuring things. Same thing with these other plastic ones, they almost click. You squeeze them until they click, and then it gives you a reading. They will all work if you, as the practitioner, use them consistently the same way. But most people aren't. The ones that I use, it takes the bias of how you're squeezing them out of it because it's spring loaded, just like the metal steel caliper ones. It's a spring loaded mechanism, so you're not biasing the pressure; it's done for you. But then these calipers, originally things like Jackson Pollock and the Perillo equation, they're done in laboratory settings and they're very specific locations on the body. And then you punch them into these fancy equations. I don't really think that's necessary. Um, what I do and how I instruct all my clients to use them is, or I do it for them, is we just caliper the same location and add up the total millimeters. And then if we're looking to lose body fat every week or bi-weekly when we check the calipers, we're looking at the total millimeter to see that it moved. I don't need an equation because I don't care what the equation spits out in terms of fat percentage because we're not mimicking the laboratory settings that these equations were done in. So we can't use the equation actually anyways. But what we can do is we can check things consistently over and over. And the key to the calipers is getting to the same location. And for that, you have to have a method. I mean, I use my hand span and I find bony landmarks or tattoos or scars or moles or something that's not going to move on the body. And then I use that as my reference point, and I use my hand span or something of my hand span to determine the distance to move from that landmark to where I want a caliper. That way I'm getting back to the same spot every time. And then the other thing you have to be consistent with is how much skin you grab. Typically, when you look at these equations in their, the manual on how to use them, they'll tell you that they grab like a 2-inch skin fold or something like that. Again, it doesn't really matter because I'm not using the equation. It just matters that I grab the same amount. So I use my finger span. I'll find the landmark, hand span measurement from the landmark. I'll lay 2, 3, 4, depends on the person. Fingers down, that's the width. I move that, that's the amount of skin I grab. So my hand's not going to change. I would know it if it did. Their landmarks aren't going to change. We would know it if they did. So the ability to get consistent readings is very, very good and well controlled, in my opinion. And so for that, I can use these calipers to an accuracy that's pretty comparable to DEXA scans on individuals. I wouldn't say my one-off caliper is as good as a DEXA scan. I would never claim that. But my ability to measure the trend of the millimeter movement is comparable. So in a perfect scenario, what I do is my client brings me a DEXA. The day or two after the DEXA they've had it, I do their skinfold measurements. And now I have whatever I have total, 80 millimeters equals the body fat percentage that the DEXA scan gave us. Now I have a correlation of 15% body fat is 75 millimeters. Now I don't care about the body fat percentage anymore. Now I just look at my millimeter movement. And every week when I check it, I add them up. And when we're down, we're down. And then usually around 6, 7 millimeters is about 1% of body fat. And if you take any of those equations, Jackson Pollock, Perillo, any of them, and you start manually overriding your numbers. So let's say you did the Jackson Pollock 7 site and you put in 7 numbers. If you move each site 1 millimeter, you'll see your percentage moved 1. If you move one site 7 millimeters and left the other ones the same, you'll still see about 1% movement. So typically around 7 or so millimeters is equivalent to about 1%. And that works out very well. I've been doing that for 20 years. So to me, it's very cost effective if you know how to use them. And really the magic in using them is the consistency. The issue though is some of them you're just able to bias the pinch, and that can skew your measurements. So the key if you're using calipers is to find one that is spring loaded, so you aren't controlling the pressure, and then all you have to worry about is being consistent. And then that works. I mean, that's still the only way I do this. If I have a DEXA option and they're willing, I'll always send them for it because it gives me other valuable information like bone mineral density and stuff like that. But from a fat loss point of view, I just look at total millimeters. And when we're down, that means we've lost body fat.
It sounds like you definitely need someone to help you out with. Like when I had to qualify to do this, we had to do 3 days of training how to do this. And assessment was you do 20 something people in one day, and you have to get as close as possible to what instructor gives you. And you have to measure each point 2 to 3 times, and are given equations. If twice your measurement is completely off, then you have to make a third one. And we had to do 8 points, but there were also equations for different things. And to be more precise, you had to also buy this equipment to measure bone girth. So my joints are way bigger than majority of people. Like that's why I need to be quite big to look aesthetically decent, whereas like most of the bodybuilders, they usually have tiny bone structure. So all that being said, it sounds like the skinfold caliper might be very precise, but that just requires quite precision from the point of view who is measuring it needs to be trained specifically for your body. So because if you measure them and then I measure them, it's going to be different.
Yeah, for sure. And that just goes to the consistency aspect of it. I mean, like in terms of the precision of them, I think it's not as good as a DEXA, but it's not about the accuracy of the one-off check. It's about the ability to continually, repeatedly measure in the same way because the consistency is how we're going to get the accuracy out of it. Um, but I do the same thing. I will measure each location 2 or 3 times just to make sure that it's reading approximately the same. Um, but I've done this well over 500 people. I just checked while you were talking there. So I've done this a lot. And I find it the best by far because it's so quick and easy and cost effective.
That's a lot
Um,
of touching.
what's that?
That's a lot of touching others.
It is. And I mean, and to be fair, some of the sites, like if you're going to do, say, like the Perillo site, or some of them are in locations that sometimes, it's a bit awkward. And so there's a lot of sites that I don't even check unless they ask. And in fact, as of the last probably 7 years or so, I don't even use the sites necessarily that the equations ask for because I don't think they're magic. I think what matters is I'm getting the same location and going from there. And the leaner people get, the more you have to start searching for body fat. I mean, once the guy or girl and females get six packs quicker than guys, once there's six pack abs, measuring abdominal measurements and suprailiac and stuff, it's not really telling you anything because there's likely not much body fat left there to be lost. So you have to start searching for it. So for men, usually that spare tire, the love handle area, that's a good location. It's not one of the sites that they typically put down in these equations. For women, lower body, oftentimes inner thigh areas is a good fat depot. So we kind of like, because I've been doing this for so long, I've just kind of gotten it. Like each client I have, they have their own measurement sites. Every client has their own folder. I know where their sites are. I have notes if I need them on how I go about getting their locations. But I mean, I work with clients and they're usually around for quite a while. I remember, who I'm checking and what I'm doing. It's not like an assembly line here. Like it's a very personal relationship I have with clients. Like, I mean, I try to keep it quite tight. Um, so the consistency is the key here. And I would put it up against any of these bioimpedance scales and stuff like that that people are using because those things are so easily skewed with outside variables that you can't even really control, where the calipers really aren't so much. I will say with the skinfold calipers, if there's a fairly big fluctuation in body weight, you'll skew a few sites, not all of them, but a few. In females, I noticed the tricep and the suprailiac skews every month when their cycle is due. It's one or the other. It's the tricep or the suprailiac. And it's been that way 100% of the females. One of those two sites usually goes up a little bit if they're holding some water from the perimenopause or the premenstrual symptoms. So that's just something that we factor in. And all my clients can look at the graphed data of their calipers, and we'll see every fourth week tricep blipped up one or suprailiac blipped up one, and then it came right back off, and that was always with menstruation. Where you get something like the popular in-body, what else are people using? Bioimpedance things that you hold in your hand. Sculpt, I think there's another one. There's a bunch. It's just an electrical current that's running through your body. And the electrical current travels at different speeds based on whether it's traveling through lean tissue, adipose tissue, water, etc. So it's basically timing how long it takes the current to, go from one limb to the next, and then spitting out a value. People take these body fat percentages to heart. I've had females that were nowhere near stage lean, but look good in a bikini, tell me that they're 7% body fat because their in body said so. And I'm like, well, no, you're absolutely not. Like, there's no chance. But that in body or the bioimpedance scales, you can check this Right now it says you're 8%. Go take a pee, come back, check it again. Your percentage will be different. Go drink a glass of water, check it again. Your percentage will be different. Put a backpack on with books. Your percentage will be different. None of that factored body fat change, but the percentage still changed. So there's an error margin there that it doesn't necessarily change its accuracy. It just changes the situation. So you have to understand what you're working with. I have had clients that I've never in person checked that we use an in body weekly for their body fat percentage checks. But what we did is we controlled the environment as much as we could. So we used it first thing in the morning, after the bathroom, same outfit or no outfit, same scenarios to get as close to a control of the variables as we could. And we use it that way. And that's okay. It works because if you're measuring trends, all these things will offer you information. Even when you're looking at athletes that measure heart rate variability and resting heart rate and max heart rate, all these things, they're using chest straps and the Whoop and the Oura Ring. None of them are going to give you an accurate one-off, but they're all going to be very accurate with their consistency if you use it the same way. And that's the magic with body composition checking, is using something repeatedly in the same scenario and then measuring the change. That's how you determine what to do, in my opinion.
Yeah, I see it a lot with, especially with electric scales, that people don't understand how faulty they are. So for
Right.
me, if somebody is really obsessed with that, I make them eat a meal and remeasure themselves afterwards, and then they drop like 5% body fat magically just because they ate a bowl of cereal or something like that. I'm like, well, you didn't get leaner from the bowl of cereal, did you?
Right.
It just
Right.
shows how skewed up and incorrect it actually is. And you mentioned DEXA scan. Do you want to talk about that? What is DEXA scan? What are advantages? What are disadvantages? And I would even give some advice how to cheat on it to get better results.
You can.
Because
You
you
can
can do
absolutely
that.
do that.
Like skinfold calipers is probably only things that you can't really cheat on uh, through nutritional strategies. Like it's just gonna show you how much skinfold you have. Whereas all others, eat something or drink something, it's gonna have a completely different thing. So talk about
Yep.
exercise, what it is, how easy do people have access to it, what are advantages of it, and what could be the major disadvantages for it.
The DEXA scan is basically taking an X-ray of your body. Um, Around here, they're quite expensive, probably $150 for a one-time scan. It's largely considered the sort of gold standard body composition check. Unless you can spend, a day in a very, very highly calibrated laboratory, they could probably do some different things that could be a little bit more precise. But for the everyday kind of accurate check, the DEX is probably the best. But what it's going to do is it's going to measure body fat percentage. It's going to be basing that on your body weight, how much body water you're holding. It's also going to measure bone mineral density, which is very valuable, especially for females, especially with regularly menstruating females and then menopausal women. So it is a great option. If you have access to one, I would do them. I suggest my clients do them periodically. It just helps validate our data, just to make sure everything is always still lining up. A couple times a year is plenty. I mean, unless you want to do the more, you can. Um, but you can cheat those as well because it's measuring the difference between fat mass and fat-free mass. It's measuring all these things. So if you go in a glycogen depleted state or a super compensated glycogen state or dehydrated or fully hydrated, you're going to get
So
different measures.
before you even go there, explain in simple terms what is glycogen depleted state and what is the
Sure.
opposite.
So let's say you decided to eat low carb for a day or two, or you decide to do a lot of aerobic type training. Basically, you've used up a lot of your muscle glycogen. Muscle glycogen is muscle specific. So the muscle you exercise is the muscle that's going to be depleting glycogen. So if I want to deplete my left bicep curls would deplete glycogen from my left arm, not really touch anywhere else. So if you had been training quite a bit recently or right before a DEXA, or you're eating a low carb diet where glycogen replenishing is hindered, you're going to be in a low glycogen state. It's going to affect your fat-free mass and your overall mass, which is going to impact your body fat percentage. Same thing if you took like an endurance runner that is, pounding down pasta for 3 days right before a race, and now they're up a few pounds, that's going to all be considered fat-free mass. And so if you weigh 4 or 5 or 10 pounds more from food volume and or water volume, it's going to count as fat-free mass. It's going to make your body fat percentage lower. So you can cheat these things. Whether or not you're intentionally cheating, that doesn't really make much sense, but you can cause a variable in these things by not being in the same or similar physiological state. And that's something that you have to consider when you're using the DEXA. So they're okay for one-offs, like I said, but even then, I would still know basically your physiological environment before you did the test, right? Like, I mean, I ate, 3 hours before, I'm fully hydrated, I'm not, just so when you repeat it, you're kind of measuring apples to apples. Where, like you mentioned earlier, the calipers don't really worry about that kind of stuff. If there's a major water fluctuation, the calipers will see that, but you're talking like a millimeter here or there. If it takes 7 millimeters to move a percent, and we moved 1 millimeter, it's essentially not even measurable. I would argue that a caliper's probably got an error margin of 1 or 2 millimeters just from the calibration of the unit and user error. So anytime we're using any of these things, you have to allot for a bit of an error margin. And a couple millimeters is pretty reasonable, and a couple millimeters isn't even a percent. So no way have I ever seen someone come in here and all of a sudden they're up, 14 millimeters, in 1 week, and that's 2%. So, but they could be up, 2% in body weight. And sometimes, especially if they're using the scale as their measurement, sometimes that's what happens with females. Their scale weight is up and they think that, something's wrong or they're gaining body fat, whatever. And the calipers show the millimeters didn't move. It's not an opinion. If the millimeters didn't go up and we're checking them consistently, you didn't gain body fat. And if you did, it's not measurable. And when I mean not measurable, I mean like I can't even get a percent out of it. So to me, it's negligible. But when it comes to the DEXA, I do think it's a good tool to use periodically, depending on what you're doing. I think it's more relevant for bone mineral density checks than it is for body fat overall, just for overall health. But from the body fat percentage, I would put a little bit of value in its percentage that it gives you. If it says you're 15%, it's probably pretty good. It's going to have an error margin of 1 or 2%, and that's fine. That's pretty accurate. So if I have a DEXA that says 15%, and I can correlate that to a sum of X amount of millimeters, then I have a pretty good correlation, and now I can just rely on the millimeter movement to determine what kind of energy balance am I in.
Yeah, I think what you keep mentioning all the time, but not directly, is standardize the procedure of how the test is run. For everything, it's your nutrition. I would even say time of the day is extremely important. I just read somebody's blood test yesterday, and it was not actually my client; it was someone else that I was kind of consulting about, and the guy didn't even know what the person had done on the day of the blood test. And there were all kind of things happening. I'm like, well, I can't tell you anything what you need to do if I don't know what he did leading up to that blood test. Same exact thing applies to body composition.
Absolutely. Yep.
Somebody can give you a feedback. Hey, you're 20%, you need to lose this. But if you came in, like you said, completely depleted and stressed out, you're probably not. You're probably on either right path or wrong path, depending on what kind of steps you took before you take that measurement.
It's very true. And the one thing too that people seem to forget, it's not that easy to gain body fat. I mean, that might sound stupid, but it's really not. Like, that's a morphological change in your body. You can't put measurable fat on overnight. If we could just put body fat on people, we could save starving people all over the world easily. We can't. So,
I think we only, sorry, I'm interrupting you. I think it's
yeah,
only seems easy because it happens over a prolonged period of time, which we don't
mhm,
take into consideration.
right.
Nobody
And
gains 40 pounds of fat over a week. It just does
right,
not happen.
right. And body weight is so easily fluctuated by the mind, like the tiniest of variations can change body weight. So if people are using body weight as their number one metric, it's very easily skewed. I skew people's body weight intentionally for certain events on purpose. I can move your body weight 10% in 5, 6 days. For you, that's probably 30 pounds.
My body weight fluctuates by 4 kilos a day.
Right. So
So
that's
when
10
I go
pounds
to bed, I'll wake
fluctuating.
up 4 kilos lighter every day.
Yeah.
That's
So we can
10
move
pounds,
body weight.
more than that.
Yeah. So we can move body weight quite easily, but body weight and body fat are not necessarily the same thing. So sometimes people they go out, they do something different, they just change their route. If they're in a routine and they change it, they're going to have a pretty decent fluctuation. If they don't have a routine, they won't see as many fluctuations, but they'll have no control over what they're doing. So they won't really know what they're even measuring. Um, but the body weight thing is what everyone looks at, and they think that they're not making progress or they're gaining body fat. You're not. It's really hard to gain fat if you're trying not to. If I'm trying to gain fat, sure, eating is easy, but to literally put on body fat, I mean, like the number one complaint I get from some of the guys that work that are trying to get bigger, when they're trying to get bigger, the complaint is they can't eat the food. They're like, I can't eat this much food. So if getting fat was so easy, everybody would be morbidly fat. I mean, maybe the obesity rate is way too high now, but those are people that aren't probably paying too close attention or not even caring. People that are caring or trying, they're not gaining fat typically like the way they think they are anyway.
Yeah, I can relate to people I work with and myself. Like, I need 6,500 calories just to maintain my body weight.
Mm-hmm.
And that body weight is not fat. So it's
Right.
I'm probably walking around 12%, you know, but I can drop it down to 8 within 6 weeks if I wanted to.
Yeah.
Probably,
And
probably,
for you to gain fat would probably require you to eat a shit ton of food, like 8, 9, 10,000 calories. That'd be hard.
yeah,
Be hard to do.
yeah. Even just maintaining my body weight is a full-time job.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
how do you integrate this skill set into a program to, well, how do you take advantage of it? Knowing your body fat, measuring your body fat, what what conclusions can you make related to, hey, this is how intense I should be training, or this is what kind of nutrition I should be eating, and this and that? Or is this really something that is more like one of million measurements that is good to have, but probably not the primary importance point to draw any conclusions about how you need to treat your body?
Um, it's a few things. For me, your lean body mass, which is going to be dictated by the body fat percentage you carry, that's how I determine the initial caloric needs. So to me, the initial caloric needs, I mean, I could ballpark it, body weight times 15 or whatever like that. Like you'll get close. But I like to try to get as close as I can, like as accurate as I can. But that's just for the initial theoretical needs. And then from a nutritional standpoint or from a caloric intake point of view. And then from there, um, I factor in what does the lifestyle look like? What type of training are they doing? How long? How often? How intense? Yada yada. And then I factor that into the energy expenditure part of the equation. And then you just give a theoretical caloric need and you implement it. And then you make real world adjustments based on what's happening. But I factor in body fat percentage as just one of the things. I use scale weight. I use scale weight all the time, but I use it as a part of the puzzle. I use training, how much training, how intense, etc., as part of the equation. I use how they're feeling as part of the equation. I used how they score my basically my daily checklist of mood, energy, sleep quality, joint pains, muscle soreness, libido, all these things. I use all that information to try to basically get a big picture idea of what's going on. And then from there, I just adjust what I think needs to be adjusted based on the results we're getting and what their goal is. Somebody looking to lose body fat, the energy balance is step one. If you don't have the right energy balance, the rest of it is not that it's not relevant, but it's second tier. Like if your goal is to lose body fat, you have to have the right energy balance in place, or it's kind of all for nothing. You can train harder if you want to try to create more of an energy deficit, but that depends on your abilities to train harder and your ability to recover from training harder. What does your schedule look like? What is your goal? Some people just want to lose body fat and they don't even exercise. I have had some clients that have taken time off of exercise from whatever reason, pregnancy, injury, whatever, and they don't want to gain body fat or they want to lose body fat. You can do it with just monitoring and manipulating the energy balance. So it's just one of the puzzle pieces. And to me, to fully get an idea of how well someone's performing and functioning, feeling, responding, you have to look at everything as much as you can anyways.
I think there is one thing that I definitely wanted to get your opinion more is body fat and sex drive. Do you see like a cutoff point for women where this is start to have really negative effect?
Yes, but from a physiological point of view, if females are getting lean enough that we're getting some hormonal disruptions, irregular cycles or stuff like that, sometimes you're seeing libido affected, but usually they're now supplying hormones exogenously, and that kind of changes the equation. If
For
females' body
somebody,
fat getting
before you go there, for somebody who is not taking hormones and they see these fitness models everywhere and jacked and six packs and all kind of stuff, and they are happily jumping around in bikinis in beach and pools and whatnot, how realistic is it to actually look and feel amazing with extremely low body fat?
well, it's not realistic at all. I would argue that it's not even, I don't want to say it's not even possible because I'm sure there's an outlier, but it should not be your goal because you're not going to achieve that goal. Those people doing that are not doing what they say they're doing. If you've gotten your body fat down to that level of leanness, which would be for a female, that lean would be approaching single digit, and you're not hormonally exogenously providing things, you're going to feel like shit. And your hormones are going to be quite tanked. It's no different than, castrating a male or, a hypogonadal male. He's going to have a very low sex drive. He's going to have very low hormones. He's going to feel like crap. The females are going to feel the same thing. And your energy is going to be non existent because to be that lean, you're clearly in quite an energy deficit. It's a terrible realistic goal if you're trying to do it, natty. And none of them, all the ones that are succeeding aren't doing it natty. And soon they'll start admitting it, but what they're all going to say is, "Oh, I'm on replacement therapy now." It's just because they were using drugs all along.
It's very
Now
popular.
they can give it an excuse. Yeah.
Yeah, and it feels like it's feeding the delusions that it's possible. And I will always well, I predominantly work with guys, and they're like, I want to have a six pack, and I'm like, do you want to have a six pack or do you want to have a good look at high energy, high sex drive, and all those kind of things? Because being shredded and having a lot of energy and a high sex drive, it just does not go together. It just
No,
doesn't exist.
it doesn't. And if the body fat gets too high, then it could be disrupting hormones to a degree. But the other thing is usually it's disrupting their self-esteem. And with females, if they don't feel great, the libido is not really going to be there.
So
And
what do
men
you
to
see
some
is
degree.
for women kind of a good body fat percentage to look great and still be healthy, high energy, everything, no apparent mood swings because of hormone disruption and so on and so forth. What is the most common you see with where they are still looking great, but they don't damage themselves?
I guess it's kind of an opinion there. What you think looks great. If I had an unbiased look at it, females that are in the high teens, low 20s look the way most women want to look, from my experience. Fitness, the fitness competitor people outside of the group, because that's a niche scenario. But just females that want to look good, feel good, they're in the high teens, low 20s. And their health markers are excellent, their libido is excellent, their energy is excellent, and they look fantastic. Um, in the fitness realm of things, women that are in the high teens feel like their body fat's way too high, but because they've created this body dysmorphia to the point where once they experience a level of leanness that was flirting with stage, everything is now fat if it's not that lean. So they have a very skewed opinion of what is really going on. But in general, even in medical literature, like it's in the low 20s is considered optimal. I find females in the high teens, low 20s feel great, and to me, they look good. But it just depends on what you determine looks good. I do have quite a few females that flirt with the mid teens, maybe even low. They don't use hormones to do that, and they claim that they feel great. I sometimes question that, to be honest. I do believe some of them feel great because they're getting a lot of compliments and attention for that physique. But their health markers are good. So I mean that's something to be said. But in general, it's going to come down to what you feel looks good. It's an opinion.
And I think it's important to highlight that for men, that percentage will be much lower than for women.
Yeah.
Um, and that might be a completely different video, just talking about body fat isn't there just to store energy. It's actually producing a lot of hormones, converting a lot of hormones, and it's almost an organ, so to speak, that's
Yep.
essential for healthy living. If you take that away, that's when you have a lot of issues downstream from there. Uh,
Absolutely.
but I think what you touched up on, I'll try to summarize it all. You have the DEXA scan, which is kind of gold standard of body fat measurement, even though you can skew it up. I did it in university. They measured me in the mornings and I had a meal and then measured again, and my results were completely different.
Yep.
Like literally, if you don't standardize how you're going to how what kind of setup you're going to have on the day of the measurement, it can have completely different result even on the same day, not
Yep.
week to week. So
Yep.
DEXA
Absolutely.
might be something you do once a year or so on and so forth. If you are a woman, maybe do it at least once in your life to understand what your bone mineral density is like, and then compare it to something like calipers could be a great idea. Whereas bioelectric impedance analysis, what you have these electric weights and whatnot, they are less precise than calipers could actually be.
They just require a lot more control of the environment to make consistent measurements happen.
And I think it also requires more of a mental fortitude because it can show you completely different result, and you're like, oh, how did I gain 5% of body fat just in 3 days?
Yeah,
It
that's a good
doesn't
point.
happen.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
It doesn't happen. So yeah, DEXA scan would be number one choice, right? Calipers could be the easiest choice to kind of avoid having huge errors. And then bioelectric impedance, as long as you standardize what you do, still a good choice. And still, at the same time, it's not the most important thing to follow through. As long as you feel good, look good, your clothing fits well, and you understand that your outcome is to be healthier individual, that one thing is only one of many that people should kind of test and follow through.
I think that comes down to one of the many videos that we've talked about where your goal needs to be fully understood. Like, what is your goal? And that really dictates a lot of what we prioritize.
Awesome, Scott. Thank you for your time.
Yeah,
Appreciate
my
it as
pleasure.
always. And we'll dig deeper on other topics next video.
Sounds good.